I think I will not see you again, General.
I made a mistake.
They handcuffed the old man at the gas station. Then 4 Hells Angels arrived and saluted. When 78-year-old Vietnam veteran Frank Morrison was handcuffed for stealing a sandwich at Murphy's gas station, he thought his dignity was gone forever until 4 Hells Angels walked in and rendered a perfect military salute. Murphy's gas station sat at the crossroads of desperation and survival on Route 9. Travelers grabbed coffee and hope for better miles ahead. Fluorescent lights buzzed over rows of processed food and energy drinks. Outside, autumn wind rattled windows. Inside, security cameras watched everything. This wasn't the kind of place where dignity mattered, just transactions, surveillance, and the unforgiving mathematics of poverty meeting corporate policy. Frank Morrison, 78, stood before the sandwich cooler with shaking hands. Those same hands had once steadied rifles in Vietnamese jungles. 3 months since Margaret died. 2 months since her medical bills consumed their savings. 1 month since he'd started rationing meals to stretch Social Security checks. His purple heart gathered dust while his stomach cramped with hunger. The sandwich cost $4.99. His wallet held $2.33, and food stamps that embarrassment prevented him from using where neighbors might see. Kevin Rodriguez, 19, watched security monitors with authority that minimum wage and a badge had inflated beyond his years. 6 months out of high school, he'd learned that catching shoplifters earned recognition from management. Recognition meant promotion opportunities. The old man had been standing by the sandwiches for 10 minutes, suspicious behavior that Kevin's training manual had taught him to recognize as prelude to theft. Corporate policy was clear: prosecute all shoplifters regardless of amount or circumstances. Frank's hunger warred with decades of military honor. Kevin's eagerness for recognition created confrontation between veteran and security guard whose inexperience couldn't recognize sacrifice. Some battles are fought in foreign jungles, others in fluorescent-lit gas stations where hunger meets policy and dignity hangs in balance. Frank stared at the turkey sandwich. His last meal had been yesterday morning free coffee and stale donuts at the VA waiting room. Margaret's voice echoed, "Frank, you're too proud for your own good." But stealing violated everything Marines had taught him about honor. The sandwich felt heavy in Frank's hands. 47 years since Vietnam. 47 years of working construction, raising kids, paying taxes, being the man Margaret deserved. None of that mattered now when hunger made decisions that honor couldn't afford. Kevin noticed the old man's hesitation. Training videos had shown exactly this behavior: suspect evaluating surroundings, calculating escape routes, preparing to commit theft. "Sir, you planning to pay for that?" Frank froze, the sandwich halfway to his jacket pocket, caught between pride and hunger like prisoner of war facing interrogation. Yes, sir. Just looking at ingredients." Kevin's suspicion deepened. The old man's nervousness confirmed guilty intentions that corporate training had taught him to recognize. "Sir, I need you to put that down and step away from the cooler." Frank's military training kicked in. Assess situation, identify threats, calculate options. But this wasn't jungle warfare. This was humiliation in front of customers who'd remember the old veteran who'd fallen so far. "Son, I'm not causing trouble, just hungry." "Sir, company policy requires me to detain suspected shoplifters until police arrive. Please don't make this harder than necessary." The words hit Frank like mortar rounds. Police arrest. Criminal record at 78 for stealing food that cost less than coffee Margaret used to buy without thinking. Kevin called 911 while keeping eyes on Frank. Military bearing couldn't hide desperation that circumstances had created through medical bills and fixed income. 911, what's your emergency? Murphy's gas station, Route 9. Need officer for shoplifting suspect. Elderly male appears homeless, attempting theft of food items. Frank listened to description that reduced lifetime of service to elderly male appears homeless. His circumstances had become police matter, requiring intervention by authorities who'd never worn uniform. Other customers watched with mixture of pity and judgment. Some recognized Frank from neighborhood where he'd lived with Margaret for 30 years. Others saw just another old man whose problems weren't their responsibility. Officer Patricia Martinez arrived within minutes. Her experience immediately recognized situation that required compassion rather than punishment for veteran. Sir, I understand you're facing difficult situation. Can we talk about what happened here? Frank appreciated respectful tone, but new legal system didn't accommodate hunger when theft was theft. Officer, I took sandwich without paying. That's stealing. I accept responsibility. Kevin handed Martinez the sandwich as evidence while explaining company policy that required prosecution regardless of suspect's personal circumstances. Store wants to press charges. Corporate policy, no exceptions. Martinez studied Frank's situation. Clean but worn clothes, military bearing despite obvious hunger, dignity that poverty hadn't destroyed. 4 Harleys rumbled into parking lot. Members of Iron Brotherhood chapter arrived for routine fuel stop during weekend ride. Their leader, Jake Steel Morrison, Vietnam veteran whose own struggles had created empathy for brothers facing challenges. Steele noticed police car and crowd gathering around handcuffed elderly man. Military bearing was unmistakable despite circumstances. Officer, what's happening here? Steele's respectful tone carried authority that motorcycle colors couldn't disguise. Martinez recognized Steele from previous encounters where Motorcycle Club had cooperated with law enforcement during community situations. Elderly gentleman detained for shoplifting, stores pressing charges according to corporate policy. Steele studied Frank's military bearing that circumstances couldn't hide despite handcuffs and humiliation. Sir, what branch did you serve? Steele addressed Frank directly. Marines, Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. Frank replied with pride that circumstances couldn't eliminate. Steele snapped to attention and rendered perfect salute that military respect demanded. Semper Fi, brother. Thank you for your service. Sometimes, brotherhood recognizes itself across decades and circumstances, and military honor transcends civilian failures that leave veterans fighting battles society pretends don't exist. The salute transformed gas station atmosphere. Other customers realized they'd witnessed arrest of decorated veteran. Military service had protected their freedom despite current hunger. Frank straightened despite handcuffs, returning salute with dignity that military training had embedded permanently. What did you do in Vietnam, sir? Steele asked while other Iron Brotherhood members formed respectful circle around scene. Force Recon, 3 tours, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star for action at Khe Sanh when my unit held position despite overwhelming enemy forces. Steele's expression showed awe that Frank's decorations commanded from fellow Marines. Combat heroism that Frank's medals represented through actions had saved American lives. Kevin watched Confrontation shift from shoplifting arrest to military recognition ceremony. Customers' cell phones documented transformation from criminal processing to veteran advocacy. Store still wants charges filed, Kevin insisted, while corporate policy required prosecution regardless of suspect's military background. Martinez faced difficult decision between following legal procedures and recognizing veteran. Circumstances had created desperate situation that compassion might address more effectively than criminal prosecution. "Officer, let me pay for sandwich and anything else this Marine needs," Steele offered, while Iron Brotherhood members reached for wallets to support brother. Frank's protest came immediately. "Can't accept charity. Got enough handouts. Still got pride left." The refusal revealed character that poverty hadn't damaged despite circumstances. Decorated veteran chose theft rather than accepting assistance that dignity made difficult. Steele understood pride that military service had instilled through training that emphasized self-reliance rather than dependence on others. "Not charity, sir. Military courtesy. When Marines see brother in need, we respond. That's brotherhood, not handout." The distinction mattered to Frank. Acceptance of help required framing that preserved dignity while addressing hunger. Other customers began expressing support for veteran. Military service deserved recognition rather than prosecution for survival-driven action. "Let the Marine eat," called out customer whose own military background had created appreciation for veteran situation. Social media documentation began as witnesses recorded confrontation between corporate policy and military honor. Community response was supporting veteran. Store manager arrived after Kevin called about situation that was attracting unwanted attention from customers. Support for veteran was creating negative publicity for corporate policy. What's the holdup? Policies clear, prosecute all shoplifters. Steele's patience ended as corporate indifference toward decorated veteran revealed values that placed profit over humanity. "Manager, this is Frank Morrison, decorated Marine whose service protected your freedom to run business that's prosecuting him for being hungry. That's not policy, that's disgrace." The confrontation attracted local news attention. Reporter Michelle Santos arrived after receiving tip about veteran arrested for stealing food. Channel 7 News. Can someone explain why decorated veteran is handcuffed for taking sandwich? Media attention created pressure requiring resolution that balanced corporate interests with community values supporting veteran. Iron Brotherhood coordination with other veteran organizations had generated additional support. Word spread through military community about decorated Marine. "This is bigger than one sandwich," Steele told Santos. Frank's situation represented systematic problem affecting veterans. Corporate headquarters contacted store manager after social media coverage had generated negative publicity threatening company reputation. "Mr. Peterson, explain why news coverage shows our store prosecuting decorated veteran for theft of sandwich while community members offer to pay," demanded regional supervisor. Peterson attempted justification through company handbook while ignoring community backlash. Suspect violated store policy by attempting theft. Security procedures require prosecution regardless of personal circumstances. But corporate legal department had identified serious liability issues. Veterans' arrest for hunger-driven desperation could constitute discrimination against protected population. Legal advice suggests immediate resolution, avoiding trial, where decorated veteran circumstances could generate adverse publicity, affecting company reputation throughout veteran community. Corporate attorney recommended. Frank faced additional pressure as media attention had attracted VA Social Services investigation into housing situation. This threatened what little independence he'd maintained through careful budgeting. Mr. Morrison, we need to assess living conditions ensuring adequate support services for veteran, social worker announced, while bureaucratic processes threatened autonomy that Frank valued more than assistance. The investigation could result in assisted living placement that would eliminate independence Frank had fought to maintain despite Margaret's death and financial collapse. Community rallying around Frank had created momentum that corporate policy couldn't control. Steele's coordination with veteran organizations had generated pressure requiring resolution. Iron Brotherhood requests meeting with store management about veteran policy revision preventing future prosecution of military families. Steele announced during packed community gathering, Frank's arrest had become symbol of civilian society's failure to support veterans adequately. Media attention transforms individual crisis into community issue when veteran advocacy meets corporate indifference during situations requiring compassion rather than legal prosecution. Peterson attended meeting under corporate pressure to resolve crisis. His management position depended on restoring community relationships that veteran prosecution had damaged. Mr. Peterson, prosecuting decorated Marine for hunger, reveals institutional priorities that veteran community cannot accept. Steele addressed manager while audience of 150 community members demonstrated support for Frank. Frank spoke about circumstances that had reduced decorated Marine to theft suspect. He emphasized that military pride made accepting assistance difficult, despite desperate need for support. Never thought service to country would end with handcuffs for stealing sandwich, but hunger makes decisions that honor can't afford when medical bills destroy savings. The statement drew emotional response. Peterson realized that community values supported Frank's position rather than corporate policy. Martinez testified about Frank's military decorations and circumstances. She challenged community to support policies that honored rather than prosecuted veterans. Frank Morrison represents values that our community was built to support. Prosecuting his desperation violates everything we claim to believe about honoring military service. Corporate intervention forced policy revision. Frank's charges were dropped in favor of community service, allowing decorated veteran to maintain dignity while addressing circumstances. Murphy's gas station establishes Frank Morrison Veteran Assistance Program, providing food assistance for military families facing financial hardship. Corporate announcement declared. Policy changes had transformed Frank's individual crisis into systematic support for vulnerable veterans. Peterson's mandatory sensitivity training included veteran advocacy education. Frank's situation had demonstrated need for corporate policies that accommodated military families. Frank's housing situation improved through veteran services coordination that Steele had facilitated. He connected with benefits advocacy and meal programs that addressed nutritional needs without compromising independence. Iron Brotherhood established regular check-ins at Murphy's Station. Their advocacy had created safe space where veterans could seek assistance without stigma. Social media documentation of successful resolution had inspired similar programs at convenience stores throughout region. Frank's story demonstrated how individual crisis could create systematic change. Community response had generated employment opportunity. Local construction company offered Frank part-time position utilizing skills that decades of building experience had developed despite age. Sometimes, losing everything teaches you what really matters, Frank reflected, while his advocacy had helped 20-plus veterans navigate services that bureaucratic complexity had previously made inaccessible. Construction company employment had provided income while utilizing skills that lifetime of building experience had developed. 3 months later, Frank had regained stability through part-time construction work and veteran assistance program that Murphy's gas station had implemented following community pressure. His circumstances had improved while dignity remained intact through support system that honored rather than pitied military service. Frank Morrison Veteran Program had served 65-plus military families, while systematic approach had replaced individual crisis response with institutional commitment. Steele's coordination with business community had created a network of veteran-friendly establishments. Their policies supported military families through employment opportunities, housing assistance, and food programs. Frank's transformation from arrested shoplifter to community advocate had demonstrated recovery potential when systematic support addressed underlying problems rather than criminalizing survival-driven actions. Murphy's gas station's first anniversary of veteran program brought together 150-plus community members. Frank's transformation from theft suspect to respected advocate had inspired similar policy changes among businesses. Frank Morrison represents hope that individual crisis can create systematic change when community values support compassionate policies, Mayor Johnson announced. Steele presented Frank with honorary Iron Brotherhood membership. Unprecedented recognition acknowledged civilian whose military service and community advocacy had earned respect. Frank earned this through service and sacrifice, faced desperate circumstances with dignity, used experience to help other veterans facing similar challenges. Steele explained, Frank's completion of veteran services training had enabled volunteer position at VA Outreach Center. His experience with bureaucratic challenges had prepared him to guide other veterans through systems. Regional expansion of veteran assistance programs had served 200-plus military families. Frank's story had inspired policy changes at 15-plus businesses. Corporate policies can transform individual injustice into systematic change when community pressure supports values that honor military service rather than criminalize circumstances veterans face. Frank's advocacy work faced challenges as veteran services specialization required training that fixed income couldn't cover, despite community recognition. Veteran advocacy requires specialized knowledge about benefits, health care, and support services that traditional training programs don't provide, explained VA Center Director. Iron Brotherhood established training scholarship covering Frank's certification. Their support had created precedent for civilian-military cooperation that served veteran welfare through educational opportunities. Community investment in Frank's training serves veteran advocacy for years, Steele observed. Frank's advocacy work had revealed systematic problems affecting veteran benefits that individual assistance couldn't address without policy changes. Murphy's gas station success had attracted corporate expansion offers that could eliminate veteran program if new ownership prioritized profit over community service. Frank's decision to maintain veteran advocacy despite opportunities for personal advancement had prioritized community service over individual benefit. Helping veterans who face same struggles I faced feels like completing mission that arrest began, Frank explained. VA Outreach Center's expansion into comprehensive assistance facility had been funded through community donations inspired by Frank's story. Murphy's gas station community ownership model had preserved veteran assistance program, while employee profit sharing had prevented corporate acquisition. 1 year later, Frank's Advocacy Center at VA Outreach had served 400-plus military families. His transformation from arrest for hunger to respected community leader had demonstrated how individual crisis could inspire systematic change. Steele's leadership had transformed Iron Brotherhood into recognized veteran advocacy organization. Frank's influence had guided community programs that addressed military family needs. Murphy's gas station had become symbol of community values. Veteran assistance program had expanded to include job placement, housing referrals, and benefits navigation for military families. Sometimes getting arrested is blessing that reveals purpose you never knew existed, Frank reflected. Iron Brotherhood veteran advocacy had earned respect that motorcycle club reputation hadn't previously generated through activities focused on military family support. VA Outreach Center had become regional model for veteran services. Frank's advocacy expertise had guided programs that addressed military family needs systematically. Regional Veterans Organization invited Frank and Steele to present their program model at state conference, where 30 communities would learn about successful partnership. Frank Morrison program demonstrates veteran brotherhood extending beyond military service into civilian community, where protecting vulnerable members remains sacred duty, VFW representative announced. Steele's presentation emphasized practical approach that combined military discipline with community cooperation, creating sustainable programs serving vulnerable populations. Frank's testimony about transformation from assault suspect to community advocate inspired audience. Their own towns faced similar problems requiring innovative solutions. But presentation faced skepticism from law enforcement officials concerned about motorcycle club involvement despite documented success. Citizens can't choose which laws to enforce, police spokesperson argued, while ignoring evidence motorcycle club had cooperated with rather than replaced law enforcement. Frank's advocacy overcame resistance through testimony about circumstances that could have been fatal without immediate intervention from volunteers. Steele's brothers arrived in 8 minutes, while police response would have taken 25 minutes minimum, Frank testified. Veterans organizations provided political support for program expansion, while community leaders from multiple towns requested assistance establishing similar volunteer networks. State Veterans Commission approved funding for program expansion to 8 counties, while establishing oversight requirements that addressed law enforcement concerns. Frank received state recognition for civilian courage, while Steele's program became regional model for volunteer partnerships serving vulnerable populations. 2 years later, Frank Morrison Veteran Advocacy Center had served 800-plus military families throughout region. Medical needs had been addressed through clinic that community support had funded. Steele's regional coordination trained 50 volunteers whose motorcycle escort service operated with 95% satisfaction rating from elderly residents. Murphy's gas station displayed photos of community members whose stories had inspired charitable giving. Sarah Martinez's establishment had become symbol of how individual businesses could serve as catalysts. Frank's daily advocacy continued with renewed confidence through community that had demonstrated commitment to protecting rather than abandoning elderly residents. Iron Brotherhood veteran advocacy had earned respect through activities that focused on military family support rather than territorial conflicts. VA Outreach Center had become regional model for veteran services, while Frank's advocacy expertise had guided programs addressing military family needs. Local construction company had grown to employ 12 veterans whose skills had been underutilized by employers who couldn't see past circumstances to recognize professional capabilities. Everyone deserves second chance when they're willing to work for it, Frank reflected, while his own transformation from homeless veteran to successful businessman had inspired others. 3 years later, Frank celebrated his 81st birthday at Community Center, where elderly advocacy program had become permanent fixture serving vulnerable residents. Your advocacy honors everyone who helped along the way, Steele observed, while understanding that Frank's success had been collective achievement. Murphy's Gas Station Veteran Assistance Program had expanded to include 25 businesses throughout region whose humanitarian policies had been inspired by Frank's transformation. Regional Veteran Assistance Network operated in 6 counties, while Frank's crisis intervention expertise had guided services addressing desperate circumstances. Community ownership of participating businesses had preserved veteran assistance programs, while profit sharing had prevented corporate acquisition. Frank Morrison Veteran Crisis Intervention Center had served 100-plus military families, while his specialization in crisis intervention had guided services addressing desperate circumstances. Steele's advocacy had inspired veteran support programs in 6 cities, demonstrating that civilian-military cooperation could address systematic problems. Their enduring friendship had proven that dignity transcends circumstances when community values support humanitarian policies over institutional compliance. Frank's story had demonstrated that protecting vulnerable veterans requires cooperation between all citizens whose shared values honor military sacrifice rather than criminalize circumstances. The Frank Morrison Veteran Crisis Intervention Center had served 200-plus military families, while Murphy's Gas Station Veteran Assistance Program had expanded to 25-plus businesses throughout region. Steele's Iron Brotherhood had coordinated $85,000 in veteran assistance, while their advocacy had earned recognition through activities focused on military family support. Frank's crisis intervention training had helped 150-plus veterans facing desperate circumstances, while his experience with hunger and arrest had provided credibility that professional counselors couldn't match. Regional Veteran Assistance Network operated in 6 counties, while Frank's advocacy expertise had guided services addressing military family needs systematically. Community ownership of participating businesses had preserved veteran assistance programs, while profit sharing had prevented corporate acquisition that might have eliminated humanitarian policies. Murphy's Gas Station had become symbol of community values, while Veteran Assistance Program had expanded to include job placement, housing referrals, and benefits navigation for military families whose needs exceeded food assistance. 4 years later, Frank Morrison's Veteran Crisis Intervention Network had served 2,000-plus military families, while Steele's advocacy had inspired veteran support programs in 8 cities, demonstrating that civilian-military cooperation could address systematic problems more effectively than individual charity or bureaucratic programs alone. Their enduring friendship had proven that dignity transcends circumstances when community values support humanitarian policies over institutional compliance that criminalizes survival-driven desperation. They learned that some battles are fought in jungles, others at gas stations, but the most important ones are fought when choosing compassion over compliance transforms individual crisis into community opportunity, for demonstrating that protecting vulnerable veterans requires cooperation between all citizens whose shared values honor military sacrifice rather than criminalize circumstances that inadequate support systems create. Individual acts of courage inspire collective action when moral clarity meets community support that values human dignity over corporate profits, creating systematic changes that honor rather than exploit those whose circumstances require assistance from neighbors whose prosperity depends on mutual care. Some battles are fought in jungles, others at gas stations, but the most important ones are fought when choosing compassion over compliance transforms individual crisis into community opportunity for honoring those who served by ensuring their dignity survives the battles they face at home.